All right. And a couple of nice words in the chat, people greeting us from California and Austin. Nancy Kittle is from Florida, so we're covering a lot of coasts and a lot of states here in this session. Again, my name is Ken Brown. I'm a professor here in Tippie teaching a class on nonprofit ethics and governance. And welcome to any of my students who've tuned in. Thank you for coming. I'm also active in the nonprofit community, currently serving as board president of the local school district foundation. As noted in the event advertising, the so-called third sector is vibrant and growing. In fact, in a period of about 20 years prior to the pandemic, the nonprofit sector, in terms of employment numbers, grew faster than the for-profit sector in the United States. So this sector is vibrant, it's growing. And the employees and managers in this sector face many of the same challenges faced by those in government and for-profit businesses. For example, if you were to open the Chronicle of Philanthropy this morning, as I did, you'll see articles on universal themes like dealing with cyber attacks, climate change, managing and political polarization, data-driven decision-making, running hybrid meetings and events, and more. You, our alumni, know a lot about these challenges from your education and work experiences. Joining a nonprofit as a volunteer or board member is a fantastic way for you to apply what you've learned and at the same time advance your knowledge and skill while serving the community. It's a perfect combination. Speaking of perfect combinations, I'm delighted with our panel today. I had prepared short introductions, but I'd rather give them time to explain their backgrounds, professional and nonprofit. So we'll go from distance to the Tippie College of Business. So we'll start with our local nonprofit legend, Leighton Smith. Then we'll hear from Kevin Abumensa, who is in New York. Finally, last but not least, zooming in from Florida, we'll hear from Nancy Kittle. Leighton, you want to get us started?
Yeah, Ken, absolutely. And thank you so much to you and to my fellow panelists and to all those in attendance for the opportunity to share a little bit about my journey. I'm humbled by the request, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. But by way of brief introductions, my life arc professionally and then in volunteerism really starts with childhood in Northwest Iowa in a small town where really I watched my family members be very engaged in community through their faith communities and around food security and other things. And in my collegiate efforts, I studied philosophy at Chicago and came back to Iowa City to study law and business. And my association with the Tippie College began there when I finished my MBA and my law degree in 2008. And I've been fortunate to be an adjunct professor here for some years as well. And I'm a recovering attorney, I always say with a bit of a smile, and have primarily worked in executive management in a variety of business advisory companies over the years. I'm a owner and leader of an organization called Bergen KDV, which was born out of a CPA firm and now includes an investment banking practice and technology and so forth. More to the point of today, though, I've been fortunate to be involved in a lot of things in community, and I think we'll unpack this more today, I think, but my motivations, I think really at first were existential. I was trying to wrestle with what a life well lived looked like. And to me, that has to do with living for others. And so all the way back to volunteering at the food pantry, to helping to fundraise for that, to chairing a number of boards over the years. I've really been very rewarded by giving back in a variety of ways, one of which I think has to do with just the chance to grow. When I was a young lawyer, I had a lot of entrepreneurial energy that didn't have an outlet in my primary career. And so I gained a reputation for being a kind of troublemaker and starter of things in the Iowa City, Cedar Rapids area. One of those was 100 Who Care, which is a group that is primarily a giving circle that gets together on a quarterly basis to make an intentional gift with 100 or more people. And there are a number of those around the country, and it could be something that those of you on the call have an interest in starting in your communities if you'd like to discuss more. But the one we've done here in Iowa City is the largest in the world in terms of members and financial impact. So I'm proud of what we've accomplished there. And currently I work closely with a number of leadership programs across the state of Iowa. Leadership Iowa is one that focuses on executive level leadership at larger employers across the state of Iowa. And I'm also fortunate to volunteer on the board for the Theater Cedar Rapids, which is a community theater located in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, that is evolving quite dramatically. So that's my most recent experience in trying to make dramatic change happen within nonprofits. So that's a bit about me.
Yeah, we talk about that phrase popularized recently about good trouble, and Leighton's done some pretty good trouble in our community. He's a little modest about actually his involvement. I had a chance to serve on him on the board of 100 plus men, and he was recognized by the Press Citizen in 2004 as one of the people of the year for that work, because it really did have a really profound impact on the local nonprofit community. And Leighton remains heavily involved in making that both one of the most fun organizations as well as the most sort of impactful in terms of the nonprofit ecosystem. So thank you, Leighton, for all that work you do in the community. All right, Kevin, it's you.
Perfect. Thanks, Ken. And thank you, Ashley, for both organizing this. And thank you for everyone who's joining, my panelists, Leighton and Nancy. Privileged to be able to share the stage with you this evening. So I'm Kevin Alamensa, originally born and raised in Chicago, Illinois, and attended Tippie from 2004 through 2008 with a degree in finance. I'm now based here in New York, as Ken referenced, and love to share a little bit about my both professional and personal background. Professionally, I started my career in finance in Chicago. Had a great experience and had a great mentor that kind of guided me towards nonprofits. That was an area that he focused in, and being able to work directly with a lot of these nonprofits from an investment perspective really was just extremely fruitful and rewarding. After I left that firm, I joined another firm in which I was able to actually start and develop a team. And currently in my new role here at BNY Mellon in New York, I've actually been able to start their nonprofit practice covering the New York tri-state. So working directly with a lot of endowments and foundations of different sizes and providing resources and support throughout the country and globally. On a personal front, how I got into the nonprofit world really started with my parents when they immigrated to America back in 1970. For them, at the age of 20, 21, they were in a foreign land from far, far away from Ghana. And the importance of community really showed up right out of the gate as they were getting acclimated to adjusting to life and getting resources provided to them. A lot of our community stepped up at that time to guide them. And as I grew up with my siblings, it was a very important part of our overall family mission. So, giving back to the organizations where we went to after school programs, helping support those in need for food, shelter, really became a big aspect of what we did as a family and still do as a family. And now I have the fortunate opportunity to be able to balance both of those professionally and personally, and sit on a couple boards where I'm able to mentor college age students, professional or student athletes, and help them through the process of being first generation, college students and navigating the challenges of balancing those two lives, and also thinking about the next phase in their careers, both professionally or athletically, and then also get to work with a great nonprofit that focuses on early childhood education, which means a lot to me, as my mom started her own business working with early age children from age 0 to 5, providing education. So being able to do that both in Chicago and internationally is really, both, I know, something that makes my mom very proud and makes me very excited to be able to, help so many kids at an early age to get the, that head start that's so important for later in life. So Ken, thank you for the invite, and I'm happy to share some more of my background and experiences with the group.
So inspiring to hear those connections between kind of the lives and the struggles that your parents had, and how that's become a part of you and part of the way that you give back. And in the nonprofit space, I think often the connections end up feeling a little more personal than they might in other settings. And with Leighton, Kevin, and with you, you see that the sort of influence of your childhood and your values and your experiences come to play. Nancy, I imagine that's the same for you too, right? Why don't you tell us a little about your background?
Yeah, I've got a bachelor's and master's from Iowa, and a 27-year career as a human resources executive for a number of public companies. As you kind of go up the ranks in some of these organizations, there's some importance in joining boards of not-for-profits. And my first experience with that was when I was Senior Vice President of Human Resources at Northern Trust, and that was expected. And so I was appointed to the board of the Arthritis Foundation. And the personal aspect of that was 4 family members were stricken with one of the autoimmune diseases covered under the title of arthritis. And it was a very personal experience for me, but it also gave me access to the research and some of the top docs, certainly in the central region of the Arthritis Foundation. And so that was very, very rewarding. Shortly after I left Northern Trust, I was celebrating my 50th birthday on a trip around the world, and found myself seated next to a project manager for the Congo Basin program of the World Wildlife Fund. And oftentimes when I put WWF on my resume, they wondered what I was doing with the World Wrestling Federation, but it was the World Wildlife Fund. And that experience changed my life. I was asked to join their national council and fully came to better understand and appreciate the issues facing our planet, our species, and our spaces in this beautiful place we all live, and what we've got to start to do about it. And so, yes, it was very personal, but it was very, very redeeming experience. And thank you, Ken, for inviting me to join this esteemed panel. It's delightful to hear their journey and to be able to share those with everybody on the call. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Every time I talk to Nancy, I think I have got to travel with her. She goes the best places and she meets the coolest people. So I think just being near her, amazing things are likely to happen.
Yeah.
So, all right, well, let's jump into a question. I think one of the things that I'm really curious about is what you've learned working with nonprofits, either as a volunteer or a board member. And here, I would welcome personal reflections. We've already talked about the connection between the personal and the professional in this space, but also things that you've learned about nonprofit governance that you think are important lessons for all of us to know. And we'll go in reverse order then. So Nancy, I'm going to kick it right back to you.
Okay.
For your thoughts on what you've learned.
Well, I think the most important thing is to have a passion. As you could hear from my fellow panelists, the passion runs deep. And so it's important that you have a passion for what the mission is of the organization you would like to participate with, and that you fully understand the roles and responsibilities. I mean, some organizations, it's strictly financial. Others, gives you the opportunity. Obviously, with World Wildlife Fund, I've traveled all over the world with them and had amazing experiences seeing places I would never have experienced, and getting a full understanding of what climate change is all about and how it affects everyone. But I think the roles and responsibilities of the board are quite varied. I was asked to step up to an executive committee position on the arthritis board because they had some sensitive issues that really needed the oversight of an HR executive. And so I was able to bring something back from my profession to the organization, and not only be on the receiving end, but also to give back. And that was really important to me.
Thanks, Nancy. What about you, Kevin?
Thanks, Ken. I kind of wrote some notes down, but I think I've kind of got it down to 3 key things that I really learned. I mean, one being leadership, the other area, impact, and that can be small and or large, and then just the entrepreneurial spirit. When I think of leadership, especially in some of the nonprofits that I've been involved with, the first one I joined, I was a year or 2 years removed from college, just a first year, second year analyst. And, a lot of times you get provided with the grunt work of things to do. My experience with the first junior board that I was on actually allowed me to lead a meeting, take initiatives to help fundraise, and learn a lot of skill sets, truthfully, that I think when I transitioned over to Goldman and had my first meeting in front of an MD and partner, actually was prepared. I understood how to put together, a business plan, agenda, and really kind of have some of those leadership skill sets that they had looked for somebody who was more of a junior employee to the team. I think of impact in the sense of, if it was thinking back to Iowa City when there was Dance Marathon and raising money outside of, Pancheros or other places, but being able to make an impact, either if it's giving, an hour of your time or giving 100 of your dollars, right? And how important that is to different organizations. And then the entrepreneurial spirit, right? Of really being able to have an idea and a vision of what you want to, help an organization with, and being able to see that through fruition. So those are kind of some of the, I think, the real big things that I've gotten out of my time, volunteering, and or being a board member.
Thanks, Kevin. I appreciate that. The three bullet, you might have seen me starting to jot that down. I think I'm going to cover that in class later next week. So, Leighton?
Yeah, so the query is, what have I learned? And I'll start philosophical and then add some pragmatic. Philosophically, at the most basic level, I've learned about myself and others. I think the distinction between nonprofit and profit, while obviously literally a legal one, is more often wrongly assumed to be one around purposefulness versus exclusive profit motive or something like that. And I learned how people behave when they're aligned around a purpose that they have passion for. I couldn't agree more with what my fellow panelists have said. And Nancy, you nailed it about do something you care about, not something that you think you should do so you can get something in your resume or something like that. So when people are aligned to a purpose, there's not much they can't do. I've also learned to, I think on the practical level, do things that I might have not been able to take the risk in doing in my core career. So, when you're a lawyer, they want to bring you in that context, or they want to bring you in to do the financials. And I usually refused and said, I'd like to actually be on the marketing committee, or I'd like to be on the fundraising committee, or I'd like to be on something else when I was in larger nonprofit board volunteerism. And I also got to learn entrepreneurial skills, right? As I already alluded to, I got to learn to make new things happen. And when you're doing that on behalf of a party that people empathize with, such as the community or whoever's being served by the nonprofit, there's a sort of a reckless abandonment that you take when you ask for help that is intoxicating, and I realized years later that I could do everything that way, and that's how I've come to lead our company as well, because those we serve deserve attention just as much as those I was in a nonprofit. So sort of a mix of skills and existential evolution, I would say, about myself. And then about others, I'm embarrassed to say that when I first started volunteering at the food pantry in North Liberty, Iowa, which was then a closet at a church and is now a standalone entity, I realized every single day, everyone I talked to had $50 million, because I was doing tax estate planning for people selling businesses that were worried about those outcomes. And it was really messing me up. And I had forgotten where I was from, and so I learned a lot about perspective, I think in some of that early volunteerism, and just gratefulness. I hope I've never totally lost that, but perspective. And some of the most powerful experiences I've had in appreciating others had to do with unpacking privilege, which I've always wanted to do, but just couldn't do without being in a pragmatic setting around it. And I've learned to appreciate how complex it is to get anything done. And I've learned to appreciate that the things nonprofits are doing, which they're so often wrongly accused of doing less efficiently, they're doing because, gosh darn it, no one else can get it done. And it's not meant to do efficiently. It's meant to be done.
Very true.
It's worthwhile to be done. And so I've learned to admire the people who do this professionally. It would be the last thing I'd say. And I've been challenged and inspired at times to reconsider what it is I'm doing with the gifts I've been given in my life. So those are some of the things I've learned. And relative to governance, maybe I'll kick it back to you and we can circle back on that. But I think we should make Ed answer his own question, because he probably knows more about it than anyone else here. So that's what I have to say to you, Ed.
Yeah, so for those who don't know Ed, he's got considerable experience with the state of Iowa government. And he posed a question about advocacy changing over the years. And we've got, on the for-profit side, we have benefit corporations now. Within the nonprofit space, it's not just 501c3s. We've got C4, C6s that are becoming more sort of common and prevalent. And the rules are not necessarily straightforward. So let's go ahead and sort of and wedge this in here, because I'm kind of interested in sort of the politics and advocacy. And each of you talked about learning a lot about yourselves and about missions and causes. Has your work with nonprofits caused you to think a little bit differently about sort of public policy and advocacy? Is that part of the mix of the things that you've learned? And I'm going to open that up to anybody, and then we'll go back to some structure. But let's go with this for a second.
Yes, I think probably for me, most of all, intersecting with subsidy for food security, and then historic tax credits. I know an unfortunate amount about as a result of a handful of projects I've worked on. And so you really do see how governmental policy impacts, decision making and where resources are guided. So no doubt about that, it made me a bit more savvy. I think it also made me a bit more cynical and sad about the resources used to sort of navigate complex systems, and just how difficult it is to incentivize outcomes. So I don't honestly know a whole lot about the specific question that you're asking, Ed. I'm sorry, I can't be more valuable.
No, but that's helpful. It's helpful to get your perspective on that. And the students that I've taught often walk away from nonprofit classes going, wow, this is more complicated than I thought. It's not just profit, nonprofit, and nonprofits often are working in complicated spaces that are heavily reliant on volunteers, board members, heavily reliant on funds from not just the government, but also private foundations. So I think there's so much richness to learn about this space, and I'm hearing that in all your answers. I do want to give Nancy or Kevin a chance to chime in about sort of advocacy or public policy. Have there been sort of lessons learned for you in that space?
Well, I'll step in. I had a rather unusual experience with the World Wildlife Fund. We landed in Central Africa and were going to our project site. There were 6 of us, one of whom was Bob Waterman, who wrote In Search of Excellence. And so the first night there, it was pointed out to me that the gentlemen that were accompanying us had AK-47 rifles, which was a bit unusual in my experience of travel. But the next morning, we were presented with the fact that 200 people from the village were coming to kidnap us because they thought we were there to shut down their logging operation, which was the only source of their income. And the idea was that we would go and negotiate with these people and say that we were not there to shut down the logging operation, but to give more visibility to how critical these environments are to the livelihood of the people that live in them. And they were afraid we would not get that message across, 2 of us, with the 200 people that were attempting to find other places for us to hang out. So it is, especially around the world, but all over the world, these issues are there. And my experience is, and then in some cases, we're able to do so much good. I think one of the other key things we were able to do is we were able to convert poachers who knew where all the animals were and where all the critical areas of the country were into game wardens. And now they were protecting those animals. And they got cool uniforms and they got cool electronic equipment and computers and things, so that here were the people that had the knowledge that were actually selling their knowledge to poachers. And now they're selling their knowledge to the people who care and want to preserve these spaces and realize the economic impact of having those spaces. So It is. It's very intricate when you kind of peel back the onion and go through phases. But it's very exciting, and it's very rewarding to have that kind of an impact on that kind of a space.
Yeah, exciting seems to be an understatement for some of the things we've been through. Hair raising as well as a great learning experience would seem to be relevant. I want to jump to another question that actually came in through the Q&A. Carson Egwin joined us, and Carson brought up something that I think is really it's critical. We're talking about the big quit, the great resignation. We know that that burnout is a huge issue for everybody across all sectors and industries. But in particular, the nonprofit is, we have many folks who are working, providing service provision, meeting the needs of folks who are underserved and who are dramatically less well served as a result of the pandemic. So Carson notes that he thinks, and I totally agree, it's important to encourage boards and executive staff working together to prioritize work-life balance. And I'm wondering if you had any experience with that on the boards that you're on now, and whether you have any observations about the things that we can do as volunteers, as board members, to try to address the issue of burnout in a really, really hard time. And I'll open that up to anybody.
Yeah, I can start. I can tell you with a lot of the organizations that I'm involved with, I mean, we're helping some of the most, underserved communities, and, the ones that are hardest hit. And so it's a challenge, out of the gate to find resources, a little bit on the advocacy side. We've been very fortunate to partner with, say, the local aldermen and folks in our communities here, and at least in my neighborhood in Manhattan. And I think that plays a big role. But it's also just being grateful and thankful for, a lot of the staff, knowing that, struggles to get grants written, struggling to get, time off and just even decompress from screen time. What we've done is find ways to just kind of show appreciation. And a lot of the conversations, like one I was on last week, was just an opportunity just to talk about, what we're all going through. I think there's been a lot of mental health issues that have been brought to light from, maybe isolation and or potential lack of resources. So I think that's really one big thing. Just providing platforms for conversations have really allowed people to understand that their voices are being heard, and the impact that they are doing is really valued and so important to the donors, to the staff, to the families. That's really one big thing that we've focused on with some of the organizations that I've really been very close with.
That's great. Very, very useful. Anyone else want to jump in?
Yeah, I would add on a more granular, I guess, and just probably basic level than that very thoughtful answer. To me, there's no free lunch, so it comes back to resourcing properly. So I'm voracious and aggressive about fundraising, and you're not going to shut me down if you're going to explain, why it doesn't make sense to pay Jane Doe this or that. And so I think referencing data and understanding the executive value of leaders and others, and understanding, of course, that there's a market rate for those who choose purpose-driven careers, but pushing that and being an advocate is part of what I would say. And then, at the risk of sounding trite, I generally take people out for dinner and buy them massages and pedicures and manicures when they're leading organizations that I'm on the board of, just to let them know personally that I appreciate them. I think this is kind of similar to healthcare workers and other caregivers who take care of other people all day, and it's impossible to overstate how far just like small touches can go. And people who ask for and take care of others all day are just so appreciative. So it's completely rewarding, so I think a lot of little things can matter, along with compensating properly and stepping up to help them secure the resources. So I think this is a serious problem. Carson, I think you should move back to Iowa City and help us to solve this. So for those who don't know, Carson used to live here, and then he abandoned us for other places, and I'm still lovingly resenting him about that choice. So.
And Leighton, that's such a great answer, because you're emphasizing sort of big and small picture, right? Appreciation is one thing, but also, making sure that people are equitably compensated, making sure that the working conditions are fair, and that we don't treat people differently just because it happens to be a 501c3.
Yeah.
Really important to consider those issues. I appreciate that. Nancy, did you want to add anything on that?
Well, I also think, there's a value to the volunteer. And in this time of isolation, and when we're all trying to reach out and grab a hold of something that replaces that wonderful hug and family connection, we can do that through not-for-profit organizations and charities. And as I forgot to mention, I've been involved with the Chicago Mitzvah campaign, which is a group supporting seniors and providing them transportation to be able to get to the doctor and to go to the center to get a meal that's prepared for them. And so, I think it's very important that we look at our volunteer organization within the not-for-profit and make sure that they're feeling good about what they're doing, because they're so critical at this time.
Great, thank you. Great insights from everybody. We actually have two questions that kind of converge, one that came in on the chat and one on the Q&A that really kind of have to do with performance improvement and disciplinary action. So Nancy, obviously,
No,
as
not
an
the
HR professional, this might give you flashbacks, but I'd like to put in the twist that was mentioned actually by Larry Elias in the Q&A, which is that boards sometimes are transitory and people's attention are split, right? So you've got an executive director, and we can think about some of the unethical issues that have happened in nonprofits. Sometimes the boards are not doing a duty of care and diligence. They're split, they're not paying enough attention, and they're rolling off so quickly that the executive director can maybe take advantage of that. So I'm curious about, as board members for the boards you've been on that have hired professional executive directors, how do we work on board oversight to make sure that CEOs who need coaching get coaching, CEOs who need corrective action get corrective action, and that it doesn't just get passed on to the next board? So Nancy, I hate to put you on the spot, but I know this is something that you know a whole lot about.
Yeah, well, the experience that I had was that the couple of the board members saw there was a need for some little bit more heavy-handed board involvement in a particular management issue. And so they formed an executive committee of the board, which also had a tenure attached to it. And you basically were asked if you could participate on the executive committee, but you had to commit to the tenure. And that gave some consistency and did help. And we also recruited people that had unique skills that were needed for the particular issue and or for the future. And that was how we handled it. It is a very sensitive issue. I remember being asked to participate at the World Wildlife Fund in the employee opinion survey. And then when, I won't mention any names, there was some concern over the results of the survey, they decided they didn't want the board to know the results. And so there were things like that that get to be difficult. But having an executive committee of the board relieves this broadness across the entire board, and yet you get some great experience participating at a higher level.
I think that's a great answer. I think boards that are effective use executive committees, and the board members know it's a substantial commitment, and they're the ones who really take it upon themselves to make sure that the things that need to get done, and if that includes sort of working on termination or coaching, they make sure that happens. Leighton, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I was going to say maybe just from a board volunteer perspective, and Ken, you'd sort of alluded to how do people choose what to get involved with. I'm going to kind of speak to that here. I mentioned just personally, I like growing, changing organizations, but I want to do a bit of due diligence. I don't want to join a board unless I intend to chair it at some time. And I don't want to be involved in chairing anything that's going to expose me to risk that's unnecessary. Doesn't mean I'm not willing to help a firm or improve something. but you usually get a gut sense immediately how the executive directors respond. Whereas when they understand that you're taking that seriously, they should either immediately feel like it's a warm safety blanket and they want to immediately tell you everything, or if they're dodgy or can't answer it, run away and find something else to be involved with, would be my counsel unsolicited to those on the call. And I would say also, I want to just amplify that I think closed quarters with executive committee is a very healthy way to create safety for openness, because there's no doubt that an overall larger board has a variety of purposes, including advocacy and fundraising and so forth. And so no reason to be unnecessarily broad in audience when you do these kinds of things, but anchoring to that kind of performance evaluation is necessary to do what I said earlier, which is go out and go to war for them and fundraise so you can pay them properly and all that. So I've had great experiences. I've had limited bad experiences, but I had one that was very bad and I would never go into again. And so I proceed with caution when you join a board where you don't get clear answers to those questions.
Yeah, and great learning experiences, even on those really difficult boards. I've been at board, been involved in executive director transitions, including sort of, forced termination. And it's painful, but it's a good learning experience. And it is a reality that is necessary for executive committees to face sometimes. So in answer to the question, we know this is difficult, but smaller, safer spaces like executive committee with some term limits can be very, very helpful in making sure that those hard decisions get made. I have another question that I want to address. We've got some really good ones. And this one is just a really high level, and I always love it. And thank you, Jill, for adding this. When you think about your board membership, what keeps you awake at night? What worries you? Leighton, you mentioned risk, and you want to be worried about, you want to be a little bit cautious about joining boards, but for the boards that you're on now, what are you worried about that's keeping you awake, if at all? And Kevin, maybe I'll start with you actually, because I know you've worked with a couple of different boards in addition to being an active volunteer.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's a couple of things, and they tend to revolve around governance, and it can be, as we talked about, a little internal governance. Actually, with a lot of the organizations that I work with, we actually have almost like contracts of what your responsibilities is, and it's all written out. So I think that alleviates a lot of the concerns, right? So we have that documented, and it's almost the point where it's like, if you cannot be, can't commit to this, it may not be a right fit for you. I know we've lost good people because of that, but at the end of the day, we're volunteering our time and making some financial commitments to organizations and things that align with our missions and values. And I would say, the other factors are, I'm also an investment guy, so I think there's some components of that that really, I think, affect a lot of organizations, because people don't realize, most not-for-profits, truthfully, are very cash strapped, right? They have, most larger organizations have the flexibility of taking in larger checks and spending it more. But if you're an organization that maybe lives off of, 50,000 in grants, those dollars need to be stretched extremely far. So I find with a lot of organizations where, they are reliant on, say, a large donor or a grant, those always concern me when they don't have the proper engagement with donors or the staff to really kind of help ensure they can live on in perpetuity, because that's the end goal for all these organizations. We want, when I step away and leave this earth, for them to be able to continue the mission that they started and, that we're so passionate about.
I would echo that. I had three answers came to mind for me. And one, to your point, Kevin, about when we're all gone from here, I try to obsess over what this will look like in 100 years. And if we're giving ourselves any chance to, make it, or whatever really long time frame, because of the resource scarcity, I think it's just so easy to get pulled into present day. So I try to I think about that a lot. Second, I really do think about what we already touched on to Carson's question, burnout of people and sort of the heroic efforts. And so I worry about them. And then thirdly, the people that you're serving, right? I think a lot about, and I'll just, maybe overly personal, but I got very involved with leukemia fundraising, and I had to stop because I was around too many kids that were dying, and it wasn't working for me. I wasn't able to do it. And so on the other hand, when I was involved with the food pantry and other organizations like that in the state, I really was losing sleep over that. Like, it really bothered me that there were hungry kids in North Liberty. For Christ's sakes, we got so many freaking resources around here, and et cetera, et cetera. And that was healthy. It turned into gardens, right? And it turned into Casey's being willing to give out a lot of free pizzas. You know, really do obsess over the details of those being served, you know, and that's been very rewarding. But I have had to learn to keep better boundaries, I'd say, in my life, and care deeply. When we do the wave every Saturday or whatever, it hits me really hard. But I just had to step away from that because it was kind of too much for me. So
yeah, that's a great answer, Leighton, and it really gets to one of the questions I wanted to make sure we got to. We won't get to all of them, but I wanted to get to, you know, what advice would you give to somebody who's interested? And the issues here are both about how to get involved if you want to and you're not. But, you know, Leighton, you just talked about, you know, sometimes you're too involved and you need to step away because it's not a good fit for you. And I think that's a beautiful answer to that. I wanted to see if other people sort of had advice for the people here on this call. What advice would you give for those who want to get involved or who are involved and they're struggling a little bit? What do you have to suggest for them?
I think Leighton hit it earlier when he referenced, you know, getting to know the organization, right? That is quite important. So spending that time and doing that due diligence is quite critical. For me, with most of the organizations that I'm involved outside of work, there's a personal connection. It's something that's important to me. I reference how my mom owns, you know, a daycare and had a daycare for 25 years, and being involved with, you know, early child education was important to me. You know, knowing that we didn't have the resources to provide after school support, like those things were very important to me. And so I tend to find organizations that, again, are aligned with my mission and know that, you know, my input or my, you know, support really can go a long way. I tend to steer away from larger organizations because, again, I want to be able to be hands-on and really kind of see some of my input be really taken and be able to be implemented. So I think that's really kind of the key things, right? You do your homework because, again, you know, these organizations that once you really find a great one, you're going to be involved for probably the rest of your life to some capacity. And it's important to do your homework and find an organization that you really love and means a lot to either you or, you know, loved ones that are very close to you.
I'll just add quickly and give Nancy the last word on this one. In addition to what you said, know what you offer, know or want to offer, want to give, know what you hope to gain, and go deep, not wide. You know, don't get involved in 50 things half rear, like go all the way in.
Yeah, that's fantastic advice. Nancy?
Yeah, that's very good advice. I think that's, you know, to the first question, I think it's, you know, how will the organization look in 100 years? And one of the things that concerns me is primarily in the area of the environment, there are so many organizations. And if we could somehow bring those together to be one more powerful, you've got the Audubon Society, you've got the World Wildlife Fund and all these environmental protection society. And now you've got growing local organizations. And in many respects, the local organizations are much more effective than the large global ones. But I think that's really important. But, you know, to Leighton's point, the clarity of what you want to do and in an organization that will allow you to do it and participate. I just didn't want to be a figurehead. I just didn't want to advise on HR issues. I really wanted to hit the ground running, okay, and have some impact. And I feel like I did that in all of the ones I was involved with, and certainly now with the Chicago Mitzvah campaign. I'm very proud to be involved with them.
What amazing opportunities, right, for us to learn and to give back. Let's see, we've got a couple minutes to do a couple more questions, and it's clear we've got some folks who want to dig into some sort of details and advice giving. And let's pick up on an anonymous attendee that raised the question about transparency. And I think transparency and communication are always, I mean, they're always touch sensitive and important issues in for-profit or nonprofit. But I'm wondering, as you've struggled with on boards issues of being transparent, but not being too transparent, communicating, but not over communicating, have you come up with some either routines or practices that you found really effective in your boards? I can say in the board that I'm on, we have a fantastic executive director who is, on the border of over communicating. She really makes sure we know every major activity of the organization. And it takes some time. And we recognize her for that and recognize that it does take time. What have you all seen that's good practice to keep particularly board members engaged, involved, and understanding of what's going on without over communicating or being too transparent based on legal constraints?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'll go again, hopefully not in a overly simplistic way, but some of it I think is just communication tactics and leading meetings effectively. I don't suffer fools very well. So when I lead meetings, I expect and demand engagement and awareness. And so I try to keep that simpler though. And I want to define when I lead a board, I want to understand key performance metrics or whatever we're looking at from outcomes, and I demand that data. Financials are always proactively provided in a timely manner and summarized, by whatever resource provides that with any key questions for exploration. So I think financials I try to hit particularly hard. We already spoke to executive management within the executive committee. So I think that's another sign of great health about this. And then, from a transparency standpoint, I think, again, I do think it's a two-way street, right? So, I mean, people proactively be communicating questions. So at a very basic level, I demand everyone when they confirm attendance to also include what questions they want clarified. No one can just say yes to the, to our agenda, our pre-approved agenda. Everyone must check in with a clarifying question. That's kind of how I run all meetings that I do, but we want to come in understanding what it is that we're trying to accomplish and clarify. And the informing part should primarily be through documents, and then dialogue and clarifying should follow. No one gets to show up to my meetings without having done their pre-work and homework. So I'm a little militant about how I lead, I guess, in summary. And I think when you do that on behalf of the executive director, it really gives them the freedom to then come in vulnerably with what their major issues are where they need dialogue, instead of kind of this report out and then it's this kind of half-arse approval of whatever, publishing. In addition to key performance indicators or outcomes, I like to clarify what it is that we're exploring or taking risks on and what the marketplace is telling us, so what thing we're trying, if say at TCR, like what edgy programming did we include this year and wonder if it might work out, right? Or whatever else. And so, so I don't know if those are, that's just kind of highly tactical, but that's my MO. I think
I'm getting the sense that there are people on this call who love the tactical. And I think your point about the important role that board chair and the executive committee has, that it's not always the executive director who should be working on accountability. In fact, it's board officers who should be working on accountability for board members and really checking in with them and setting high standards about listening, paying attention, asking questions, understanding.
Yeah.
And you can often tell whether people understand or not based on, whether they're saying anything, and when they do ask questions, what they're asking. So
yeah,
good stuff. Others want to join in on this issue?
Yeah, so I just have a kind of a contrasting view on transparency. I know one of the organizations I'm involved with is predominantly providing support in parts of Africa and in the Caribbeans. And, this past 2 years with us not being able to travel, and also kind of having some political impacts going on in those places, the physical transparency that we would get from going there and actually seeing where those dollars were put into programs actually has been, I think, a challenge for some organizations. When it was, a 3-4 hour flight or maybe a little bit longer, you could actually get some of that impact and show that to your donors. So I do think for some people where it is important, if it's either through their board involvement and or their donations, to actually see, where that's going and how it's being utilized, there actually has been some pushback on transparency. And the boards that I've talked with and involved with, what they've done is make sure that they have the appropriate strategic partnership. So if it's almost as militant as Leighton is describing, we have key partners that we've built long-standing relationships with that we know will be accountable, use all those resources, report back to us and all the impact that it's doing. And there's a level of trust that has been established over time to know that, even though we can't be there in person, we are getting, everything is being done to the capacity that they can do within the framework. So I think that's really what we've tried to do in this environment. I know in the future, once things, get back to somewhat normal or the new normal, I think the transparency that, from a donor's perspective or even a board member knowing if they're working on a specific initiative will be able to be shown from that perspective of seeing, the building or the other projects being actually executed to that level.
That's fantastic. Very, very helpful. And I think some of what we've just talked about, particularly as we got tactical, answers a question that came up that I think is worth noting. Someone said, hey, I run a private foundation. Do I belong here? Are there lessons here? And I think everything we talked about applies to public charities, to private sort of foundations, which have slightly different reporting and structures. And there are a lot more family foundations now in the United States than ever before. But many of the things we talked about are just as applicable there. And frankly, many of these are applicable to for-profit boards. When we talk about good governance, if you're on the board of Microsoft, the same issues about board accountability come into play. All right, well, let's begin a wrap up. I cannot fully convey just my gratitude. I could keep going with the three of you for a long time, and we've had great questions from the audience, and I'm really grateful to you all for joining us and adding great questions. I know we weren't able to get to all of the questions. I do want to open up the possibility that you can contact people directly. I've put my email address as well as my Twitter account on there. Leighton and Kevin and Nancy have offered to answer your questions if you want to email them directly. You see that information on your screen. We really are grateful for everything that the alumni community does. The dean, the relatively new dean of the Tippie College of Business, Amy Christoph Brown, talks a lot about how our engagement with the business, the nonprofit, and our alumni communities is absolutely essential for our strength. We build on the successes of alumni. Our successes are yours, and your successes are ours. And these three alumni who joined us today are great examples of that. They've given back to Tippie in lots of different ways. I like to think that we've helped them and supported them, but I have to say it's just an honor to work with them, and I'm so grateful for their activity today. We're excited to see you again at the next webinar that I mentioned for you with Professor Villamel. And when the event ends in just a minute, I had mentioned early on in housekeeping, you'll see a quick survey. Really grateful if you just take a minute and answer that. Share your thoughts and ideas. We want to make our future virtual events even better to try to connect you all with each other and with the life of the college. So on behalf of everyone here in the Tippie College of Business, thank you for joining us this afternoon. Have a fantastic evening.
Hawks.
Thank you
And of
very
course,
much, Ken.
Go Hawks, right?
Go Hawks, yeah.
That's
Thanks,
right. I
everyone.
can't believe, you always have to end with that, right? So thanks, Leighton. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Nancy.
Thanks all. Appreciate you. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.